Okay, so the short version about Morbius is, except for the fact that it's a pretty bad movie, it's really not that bad. That's not going to make a lot of sense, but there you are. Okay, so that's the short version. If you want the longer version, well, spoilers ahead. So there's been a lot of discussion of the very negative reviewing of the movie. For example, calling it the worst superhero movie of the last 25 years, or since the 90s, or whatever. And that's a very weird framework in which to evaluate this movie if you've seen it, because I'm not sure I'd call this a superhero movie. For the most part, the answer is that what it's trying to be is paranormal thriller or supernatural thriller or sci-fi action. The main character in the story isn't a superhero, doesn't become a superhero, isn't contextualized by superhero stories. More reasonable comparisons might be like the 2017 The Mummy, or Deep Blue Sea, or the 2018 Predator remake, or Constantine. I think a lot of the complaining that this is a really god awful superhero movie is the insistence that movies about characters in superhero comics have to adhere to a really restrictive set of genre conventions that were more or less invented by Disney and by Favreau and Chris Nolan and Joss Whedon. Not that I'm complaining about those movies, but it's this complaint. It's the same complaint as about Constantine, that it's a bad superhero movie because it's trying to do anything else. I don't really want to have this fight about Morbius, which is a bad movie, defending such a bad movie. But there's this guy who's only seen Boss Baby thing. Well, it's not like the one movie that I keep going to the theaters to see over and over again complaint. What kind of movie could Morbius be? Let's try to crack open a Morbius story ourselves. Who's Morbius in the comics? He's one of Spider-Man's tragic biochemical villains, like the Lizard, like in some interpretations Dr. Octopus, like in some interpretations the Green Goblin and the Hobgoblin, etc. These are people who, like Spider-Man, have been transformed into monstrous or animal versions of people. But unlike Spider-Man, who gets just the powers, they get the mental transformation too, this bestial insanity or paranoia, possibly awoken from within themselves or possibly a new intrusion on them. But often these villains are obsessed with curing themselves. Often they're seen as great and moral men before the transformation, and then the transformation unearths or strengthens something in their personality or unleashes something in their behavior. Often in the comics, these characters become ongoing tragic figures, searching for a cure for their condition, but also dangerously unstable people, prone to violent rampages that require Spider-Man's intervention. In Morbius's case, Morbius is a genius doctor with a blood condition, and attempting to treat himself for this blood condition, he transforms himself into a bat creature, basically a vampire, that has a great thirst for human blood. And so he becomes a person who is trying to cure himself of this, but also kind of a monster. But you don't have Spider-Man for this story. So what are you going to do with that? I mean, I think it still works. I think that is basically a good paranormal protagonist hook on its own. But you're going to need a new direction because, he doesn't have an opponent anymore. And he doesn't have an arc anymore without Spider-Man to play off of. So what do? A couple of ideas. You can do a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, where he's both the villain and hero in the same body. That's hard to pull off on film, as an action thing. It would be hard to persuade a studio that you're going to get a $400 million box office out of a guy fighting himself. So, okay. You could have the antagonist be an overzealous cop or an FBI agent or something. Someone whose efforts to take down the monster are the obstacle to Morbius being able to regain control of his life. He's trying to get the cure, but army or whatever keeps interfering. This is a direction that Hulk stories have gone. And you could have that antagonist be thematically a representation of society's overzealous rejection of people who don't fit in, preventing those people from doing the things that they want to do in order to fit in. Or you could do what's my favorite idea that I've come up with, which is you just halfway through the movie, you just do a hard pivot from psychological thriller to horror movie. Morbius becomes the monster, and now halfway through, when you sympathize with him and you've built up all these relationships of his support network, his girlfriend or whatever, his parents or whatever, those people become the people who have to try to stop him, and you feel their horror because you felt them trying to respond, trying to deal with him, and you feel their horror because you feel, the response that they are having to try to stop someone they love, and you feel bad for Morbius because you've had that hour of trying to protect him, of trying to be on his side. So what do? Well, they have there be another patient who's Morbius but more evil. It's a huge mistake. The other patient is Matt Smith's character. We're going to come back to him in a bit. He's got the same condition as Morbius, but he's not as good of a person as Morbius is, and so he becomes very evil. It becomes a very victim-blamey thing because the cause of Morbius seeking this treatment is his illness, which is badly debilitating. He's not trying to disrupt the natural order or whatever. He just wants to be a normal person. So when they go, but at what cost? And you go, so what you're really talking about is a disabled person who, in the movie's conceit, ought to accept not being a fully functioning member of society rather than trying to become a fully functioning member of society. I think that's pretty gross. The other big problem that I want to talk about is there's a real lack of camp. There's a huge problem in a monster story, in a story that's so inflected by B movies, that's going to make you think of Deep Blue Sea or Event Horizon or something. The lack of camp, the way that everyone's playing this like they're in, phone booth or something without really owning just how weird this is. They're putting it in this very grounded New York City, not comic book New York City and not camp New York City, just very normal New York City. And that's very strange to me. It really underplays the horror inflection that you want in a supernatural thriller story. And I don't know exactly whose idea that was. I don't know what the underlying idea of that was. We're going to get back to that in a second. The people who have figured out what the story is, Matt Smith and the CGI team, are getting it way better than the people who haven't. Speaking of which, I'm not a Jared Leto defender. Is Jared Leto a good actor? That's a complicated question. Jared Leto is clearly an actor who has access to a lot of tools of acting. He is not wooden, he is not comically unskilled, but he has some pretty bad performances in his background. If you think about some of the performances people make fun of, his Joker performance, his performance in Blade Runner 2049, his performance in House of Gucci, what you are talking about are supporting roles in which he's detracting from the movie because he's making way too big choices for parts in which he's supposed to be helping the movie with a scene or a sequence that's not really about his character, in which his character is supporting some other idea. So maybe what you might take away from that is he can't really be constrained in supporting roles, but if you gave him a starring role in something properly weird, something he can chew on, maybe you could just let those choices loose, something you could tell him to, fucking go for it, buddy. And so here he is, headlining his own movie, and it's a weird movie, and where'd he go? This is like a really campy and ridiculous concept, and there's Jared Leto over there underplaying the role and mumbling and slurring all of his lines. The romantic tension with his character is very underplayed. The connection with the Jared Harris and Matt Smith's character is very underplayed. There's also some choices that feel like they're trying to give Leto the awesome character that he wants, like Leto's character, who's already a genius doctor who rejects a Nobel Prize because he's so driven that he won't take the Nobel for what he doesn't think is his best work. And he's also a mechanical super genius because why not? And it leaves you feeling about him like, well, if he can't support other actors in their own movies and he can't take over a movie and lead it himself, well... As for Jared Harris is a phenomenal actor. His typecast role, the role he slots into, if you're not going to go that far with him, the role he slots into is a man with a conscience. It's a man who looks out at the world and sees evil, and he just regrets. As a human being, he just regrets the evil that there is. You've seen him as that in Chernobyl, for instance. You saw him as that in the whatever that horror thing was. The one about trying to find a Northwest Passage. And that's what he's doing here in 3 scenes. It's very weird. He's barely in the movie, even though he is by far the most talented performer in it. The other major supporting character is Matt Smith. Matt Smith's character is Milo, except that his name is actually Lucian Crown, which you may know is kind of a reference to a comic book character, I guess, but he's not that character. He's another patient, and we've talked about that character already. What I'll say is that Matt Smith is by far the best thing in the movie. He's really phenomenally cast, is what I'd say. This is something that Edgar Wright saw in Matt Smith in Last Night in Soho, and that you even saw shades of him in his run as the Doctor. That it's not the perfect, charming guy that's great. It's the, 5% of sleaze. The way that he can make the awful person underneath just leak out a little bit and give you the sense that this guy is handsome and charming and, oh no, he's actually an awful person. And then that turns out to be true. The other thing about the movie is it's 104 minutes long. The feeling one gets is of a movie that's been brutally hacked down. The climax is bizarrely perfunctory. The introduction is way too short. The relationships between characters are barely established, and then we're supposed to really care about them later in a very Doctor Strange kind of way. Because the story is just Matt Smith versus Jared Leto, and they just are the same person, the story at the very end turns into them fighting over, whatever, in a very the special effects are all here for them to beat each other up for a bit. Okay, you can have fights between characters that aren't well-defined in terms of power level or seem to be sort of even in terms of power level. You can think of the third Matrix movie. That's fine, but that's a representation of the hero buckling down and finding the inner solution. Probably the best version of this that I can point out is the end of Return of the Jedi, when Luke fights Darth Vader again, and the solution turns out not to be Luke Skywalker beat Darth Vader at a lightsaber fight, but turn your lightsaber off. Make the climax about the relationship instead of this totally arbitrary conflict. That's definitely something that they've missed here. Now, the director is Daniel Espinosa. He's directed a few movies. Probably the biggest of them was Safe House. And this has a lot of the same kinds of problems as Safe House did, even though the genres are completely different. So one can suspect that maybe the problem is not that it's been hacked down in the edit, but that the director simply did not shoot enough of the movie. There just is not enough of the movie to work from. And so the movie is too short because they didn't make enough of the climax and they didn't make enough of the introduction. And it ends abruptly at the end because they didn't make enough denouement. And that could be right. Or maybe they made more of the movie and it didn't work and Sony took a look at it and went, well, listen, you just got to take it down to 105 minutes, make it breeze through, and maybe the pacing will make it work, because it's hard to come down too hard on it for being 104 minutes, because it being so brisk is what makes it work, especially going in knowing it's a short movie. It being so brisk is what makes it kind of work. It's just not enough time to get properly bored. Finally, there are, at the end, in the credits two incredibly perfunctory mid-credit scenes intended to tie this into the No Way Home multiverse, featuring a dimension-hopping Michael Keaton as Vulture was his character. These scenes are the only representation in the entire movie of an effort to build this into a broader superhero universe, and they're comically underplayed. One of them literally involves Michael Keaton manifesting in a prison cell. Empty prison cell, then he's in it, he looks in the mirror. Ding. Now, they're mid-credit scenes, and there's no other relationship to the broader Spider-Man universe of Marvel characters or whatever they called it. So you can just go, well, that's just not really part of the movie. They aren't really part of the movie. And I do think people have a bit of a blind spot about mid-credit scenes, because the credit scene that starts it all is Samuel Jackson walking into shot and going, Avengers Initiative, and that's it. Like, these really are always just intended as, look, more movie, another movie, and they're always throwaway gags. This one is just comical because it just has nothing to do with anything. The one thing that it left me thinking, though, was the thing about these Spider-Man universe movies we're getting is they were all made or started to be made. They were all in development before Into the Spider-Verse, the animated Spider-Man movie, which is way more of a success than anything Sony has tried to attach into the live-action Spider-Man movies. And one is looking at these movies and going, Kraven the Hunter, Morbius, these would work a lot better, as animated features. And the reason they're not is really not that Sony hates animation, not that it didn't occur to them. It's just that the movies were in development before Into the Spider-Verse came out. And so one has the sense that, well, they're doing this now, but really they don't have to spin up a Spider-Man live-action universe, because these movies would work much better as a cinematic universe in the animated format. And you could just have Kraven the Hunter have a solo adventure. It would be way easier to get some cameos from characters that have appeared in Into the Spider-Verse. Just send a guy into a recording booth for a couple of hours to get a cameo. It would be so much easier to make this kind of cinematic universe as an animated concept. So one wonders, are they really going to stick with this, or are they just going to move on to doing the Spider-Verse stories, trying to resurrect these characters in the broader Spider-Verse stories? And I think they probably will. Beyond that, broader canon, whatever, Simon Stroud is in it, I guess. Don't think I didn't notice that time that they said, quote, school in New York for gifted children. But overall, it's basically a standalone movie. It's not a very good standalone movie, but it's way less bad than you've been told. It's just the kind of bad movie that you spend 100 minutes watching and it was fine. It wasn't bad, except, that it was bad.